Hi everyone, and welcome to Mini Lecture 5. Today we'll be discussing comma rules. Before we begin, take a moment to gather the materials for today's lecture assignment. Today's lecture assignment is going to be more of a reflection, so you just need a Word document to write on. The purpose and goals for today's lecture will be as follows. First, we'll explore the roles commas play in writing. We'll then discuss key comma rules, and then we'll finally examine comma placement in various contexts. I want to, though, preface this lecture by saying we are not going to get to all of the comma rules. Rather, we will examine those that are seen most commonly in academic writing. If we wanted to discuss all of the comma rules, we could be here all semester. And so again, we are just focusing on the ones that are commonly seen and misunderstood in academic writing. Now, commas can be pretty pesky. There are a lot of rules regarding them, but they are kind of the jack of all trades in that they do a lot, and they certainly help make your writing readable, and it helps really the reader go throughout your text in the way that you intended them to. So some of the most common purposes for commas will be, first, it provides readers with a brief pause. So if you think about, if you're writing a quote, or if you're, let's say, writing, a creative piece, a short story, and one of your characters is monologuing, well, that character has to breathe sometime, right? Well, if, you're reading your text aloud, so do you, even if you're reading an academic paper. And so you can always think about commas are sort of a moment to pause and to breathe. They are your opportunity as the writer to say, hey, we're going to slow down for a second, we're going to catch our breath, and then we're going to move on to more content. But it also gives your reader that opportunity as well. Commas also indicate information not vital to the core of the sentence. Now, this is where a comma really is acting as a visual indicator. So when you are writing, you probably will find yourself saying, okay, well, I've got this little tidbit of information, and we'll see that more here as we explore examples throughout this lecture. But, you could say, all right, well, the reader doesn't really need to know this information. It's helpful, but it's still a complete sentence if I remove it. You would rope that information off using commas. That indicates to the reader to say, hey, not absolutely vital that I know this, but the writer was just being really nice and wanted me to fully understand and easily understand what they meant. And then finally, a common purpose for commas will be to separate different bits of information, which we typically tend to see when we are listing items in a series. So first, let's talk about how we use commas to connect sentences. Now, these commas are going to be used to connect two independent clauses. Now, they are immediately followed by a conjunction. That is absolutely important, because if you don't have a conjunction, like we see here at the bottom in our examples, then we are basically writing a comma splice, which is a type of run-on sentence and is grammatically incorrect. So when using a comma in writing and you want to create that compound sentence, you have to make sure that you've got a conjunction of some sort there. And what conjunction you use is entirely up to you and whatever relationship you want to establish between two sentences. So we look here. The book was not available at the DSU library, comma, so I requested it from UNLV. Canvas lists the due date as Friday, comma, but the course calendar says Monday. And so we're using a comma to connect two sentences, but we can't, again, do it with just a comma alone. We want to make sure that we have that conjunction. And so even though if I see a comma splice, I do recognize it as, an error in terms of, proper sentence structure, but it also is misusing a comma as well. So if you're using a comma to connect two independent clauses or two complete sentences, make sure you've got that conjunction to come after. The next way that we see commas used will be to visually distinguish dependent clauses. So that goes back to earlier in the lecture when I talked about bits of information that aren't really necessary to understanding the sentence, but it's just really helpful, and it will help the reader better understand your content. Now, these are often demonstrated through dependent clauses, and those are clauses that do not express a complete thought. Remember, an independent clause is another word for a complete sentence or a grammatically correct sentence. A dependent clause misses either the subject or the verb, and dependent clauses can be helpful. Again, they give helpful tidbits of information that might help the reader immensely in trying to grasp and appreciate what it is that you've written for them. Now, because of that, they're pretty flexible in where you can place them in the sentence, especially with the help of commas. So they can occur at the beginning or end of the sentence, or can actually be embedded in the sentence itself. Now, commas in this sense, like I had mentioned, are used to visually separate the dependent clause from the independent clause. So the commas are sort of your flags to say, whoa, 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 everything within, these commas here, not necessary. They're not a part of the complete sentence. They're not a part of the independent clause. Just a little, bit of helpful information to help you more fully appreciate the independent clause. So we've got these examples here. Due to her illness, comma, the project manager canceled the meeting. So we could easily read that as the project manager canceled the meeting. But because we've got a dependent clause followed by a comma, we're including additional information, again, not vital to understanding the sentence, but helpful to provide additional rationale for why the project manager had to cancel the meeting. The Pacific Ocean, which borders the western United States, is the largest ocean in the world. So again, I could completely remove that center-dependent clause to say the Pacific Ocean is the largest ocean in the world, but maybe I'm talking to first graders who need to know where that ocean is in terms of, the world. And so if I were writing to them, I would say, comma, which borders the western United States, comma, is the largest ocean in the world. So again, that just helps to modify the independent clause in such a way that the readers can more fully understand it. And then finally, the students submitted their lab reports on time, comma, even though they experienced troubles accessing Google Sheets. Again, I don't need to know that last bit of information, but it's helpful to appreciate the fact that their students got the lab reports in on time. So when we think about other rules for commas, another way that we see this come up is we separate items in a series. So I went to Target to buy makeup, comma, a sleeping bag, comma, and a new video game. I will say this, the final comma in this series is so heavily debated in writing in general, and it's the Oxford comma. Now, I use the Oxford comma in my writing, but I've also encountered very solid writing that doesn't use the Oxford comma. I'll be honest, as an instructor, you can use the Oxford comma or you don't have to use the Oxford comma because that can change from one discipline to the next. So I believe it's like communication, business. They typically will tend to stray away and not use the Oxford comma, but humanities, sciences, they will typically tend to use it. So really, whatever you decide to go with, just be consistent. So if you want to use the Oxford comma whenever you are separating items in a series, if you want to use it, just make sure you use it throughout your entire work. If you don't want to use it, just make sure you don't use it throughout your entire work. But really, it's all up to you as the writer. Consistency, though, in choice is key. We also can use a comma when we are separating bits of information regarding place and dates. So for a time, comma, because that's a dependent clause, I lived in Yukon, comma, Oklahoma. So we're separating the city and the state, much like we would say St. George, comma, Utah, or Las Vegas, comma, Nevada. So we can also see this in terms of when we write dates as well, separating the date or the day with the year. So according to the package, we should eat the ham before September 1st, comma, 2018. So we've got that comma in between the 1, indicating the date, and the year 2018. This last one is also very important. I think it's just, we see this kind of comma rule being broken a lot of the times just because writers aren't aware that it's a rule, but it is, and it can help your writing out a lot. So this is when we want to separate adjectives modifying the same noun. So the loud, comma, jarring noise caught the attention of everyone at the barbecue. So both loud and jarring are modifying the noun noise. And so in order to separate those two and to indicate that they are indeed modifying the same noun, we want to put a comma in between them. So at the other example, at the end of the marathon, comma, again, dependent clause, the runner enjoyed a large bottle of cold, comma, refreshing water. Again, this indicates to the reader that the adjectives cold and refreshing modify the word water. The reason that I do want to stress this rule is because it can help you as the writer emphasize adjectives that you've deemed important enough to include in your own writing. You can emphasize them individually and in a way where they sort of stand in their own spotlight rather than being blended together. So I know that the noise was loud and I know that it was jarring. I know the water was cold and I know that the water was refreshing. And so not only can I put those two adjectives in concert to modify my understanding of the noun, but I can also appreciate it for being a loud noise and a jarring noise, or cold water and refreshing water. And so by including those commas in between the adjectives, again, you can see how it can really help you emphasize your word choice that you've used to modify your nouns and really emphasize the meaning that you're trying to create. All right, so for the lecture assignment, like I said at the beginning of the lecture, we're not really going to be working with any current ongoing project, but I want you to do a bit of reflection. Commas seem to be the biggest obstacle most of the 2010 students that I've talked to that they bring up in discussion, that they say, oh, I'd like help with, my comma usage and so on. And, I've been writing for too long to count, and commas still perplex me, and I'm still learning new things and new rules every day regarding commas. And so it's important, because commas are so vital to good writing, but they are tricky to navigate. It's important to reflect on where exactly we get hung up on them. So I'd like you to compose a brief write-up, about 75 words, detailing the following. I want you to talk about your biggest struggle with comma usage. So maybe that is, you don't include a conjunction after a comma when connecting two independent clauses. Maybe you don't remember to include the comma between the city and the state, or whatever that may be. So whatever struggle that you might have faced with comma rules. And then I want you to just lay out a plan for how you plan to account for those struggles in your 2010 projects. Are you going to, highlight all of the dates in your drafts to make sure that you've included the commas? Are you going to, every time you write a compound sentence, are you going to stop and read through the sentence again to ensure you've got that comma where it needs to be? Are you going to circle all of your adjectives that might happen, that you come across, to make sure that you're separating you're separating the adjectives that modify just one noun. So however that, comes up to you personally, or you can even address things that we didn't discuss here. Like I said, we're not covering all of the comma rules. If we did, we'd be here for, well, a lot longer than, the 15-ish minutes that we are. And so if it falls outside of that realm, feel free to mention that as well, and start thinking about how you can account for those both in your writing and in your revision throughout the projects that we have done and will do this semester. All right, so that is the end of talking about commas and our lecture on commas. If you have any questions or if there are any concepts that I can speak to further, please don't hesitate to contact me. All right, everyone, until next time.